I would now like to welcome all of our speakers to turn on their cameras and come together for a roundtable and a panel discussion. An excellent lineup of talks, needless to say, today. It was a really fantastic session and a privilege to moderate it. We have one question in the Q&A box before I launch into some more general questions that I've prepared myself. But a reminder for any of our viewers who do have questions for our speakers, now is the time to address them. So please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. From Jose Cordero, a friend of ours who we've had on other webinars, asks how much faster we can advance with AI for drug development. So I assume that he's speaking in general terms, in terms of real quantitative numbers. How much acceleration are we really looking at here? Andre or Helen, perhaps you'd like to briefly answer that before we dive into some more investment focused questions.
Well, I think with respects to digital, I think we're seeing more, I want to say, innovation within what's called, and I think it's become more popular, this whole idea of platform technology, where you're now starting to see more digital therapeutics really enhancing the research and development process, where you have companies like Moderna, who was able to kind of pivot based on their platform and based on responding at a specific need. And you're going to start seeing, with regards to innovations, like digital therapy and other products and treatments, where companies can just kind of pivot on the whim in terms of if there is a pandemic, whether it's a virus or whether it's something to do with cancer or something to do with CNS. You're going to have companies with platforms who are able to pivot and move their research and development in that certain space. And we're working with a company right now where they are actually starting to build such platform called iPlatform, which will service the metabolic space, which will service the nephrology space, which will service the CNS space. And so I think you're going to start seeing more of that occurring, where research and development is going to become more efficient and more able to kind of pivot to certain disease states.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andre. Andre and Helen, any brief remarks to follow up?
I would also add that, first of all, I'm really I agree with the previous thing, and that's indeed the rise of platform-based businesses is what drives the new wave of technology innovation in pharma. And on top of that, the very important thing is being able to model biology, and modeling biology is a very complex and multifaceted thing, because on the one hand, you need companies who can conduct high throughput experimentation and collect data automatically. And we have seen some companies who are quite useful in this case. For example, Arcturus, one of the from the top of my mind. And then on the other hand, we need companies who can model that data, being able to build real ontologies for the diseases, to understand, the similarities between healthy cells and diseased cells, for example, finds new targets, etc. And in my opinion, this whole thing will move quite dramatically once certain degree of modeling will be achieved by the industry, and we are rapidly going in that direction. Once the biology kind of cracked to a significant extent, the way other technologies will be progressing in this field will exponentially go from that point. So in my opinion, might happen within several years from now. But some companies, cite a reason, for example, another company from the top of my mind, which models biology on the cell level. And yes, and so these companies, this platform-based companies, those will win who have the data, who have the ability to model biology, who can from there derive new, treatments, preclinical candidates with high success rates, etc. That's just
Very well said, Andre. Yeah, it's definitely going to be AI and IT technologies that drives disruption in this field. And I know that we were talking on, I believe, yesterday's panel, certain competitive advantages that AI for drug discovery startups and scale-ups might have over some of the bigger players, specifically a platform-first mindset that is the foundation of their psychology and in their bones as a company, etc. So very well said, and thank you. Helen, did you have something to add briefly to that?
Yeah, so real quick, we should also take count on big tech companies who also enter pharma field, like NVIDIA with their Clara Discovery platform. And keep an eye on CROs merging with the platforms that already mentioned by previous speakers. Because big tech, they have enormous amounts of investments in this field right now, which is kind of a kind of a big deal, and their advantages over big pharma companies in that kind of question.
Very well said, and seems sensible enough to me. Moving away from a strictly technology standpoint and getting more into investment trends, specifics, etc. I would say certainly biotech is a notoriously difficult space for investments, especially as far as reliable valuation, due diligence, etc. comes into play. We're only seeing the complexity and the degree of multidimensionality increase when we think of things like AI for drug discovery and longevity in particular, which was a particular focus of a number of our earlier talks. So I'm wondering if our speakers today have any particular thoughts on what unique challenges there are for investment in biotech and healthcare and pharma and in longevity compared to other sectors, and in particular with regards to going public, whether that's via special purpose acquisition company or via traditional IPO. What are the major challenges in this space compared to other sectors?
Well, let's start with the very fundamental reason why biotech is kind of unique is the unpredictability of research itself. So like with the company developing, coffee machines, let's say, you can pretty much project how the business is going to operate more or less. I mean, you can be kind of wrong on some projections, but at least you know that the coffee machine is going to make coffee, and that's 100%. In research, that doesn't work like that most of the time. And if you good example is Alzheimer therapeutic area, where the whole it's doubtful that the theory that is now underlying this therapeutic area is actually correct or correct to a very high extent. Maybe some other factors play a role, and so we see a lot of failures in clinical trial where, of course, there was the initial financial bet on that, and then the bet just goes to nothing when it appears that the drug just doesn't work for whatever reason. And of course, everybody was trying hard, but if the biology was misunderstood at some point, at some early point, there is no way it will actually go well at the end. So that's the major problem with the biotech investment in general. And so that's why, by the way, we see a lot of, everybody understands why we see a lot of fluctuation in early stage public companies, or because the clinical trial data goes out and it appears that it's not very good. That's it, end of story. So and the AI and the technology, this kind of industrialization of biology, is one very major shift, positive shift in the direction of being able to understand biology more, and therefore make it more like a coffee machine kind of business where pretty much that the product at least is going to work. That's my
right. Though I would say to some extent it might be a dual optima problem, because while these AI technologies do bring in a lot of objectification, etc., and validation, we're also seeing healthcare and medicines themselves becoming more complex. There's a big growing trend, especially long-term, towards more personalized medicines, more precise, medicines precisely tailored to specific cohorts and population groups, et cetera, and bringing longevity into play, which, seeks to act upon and modulate these deep-rooted targets, which are actually, fundamental causes of myriads of diseases. It's pretty complex. So we could see an increase, I think, at least, in complexification. So thankfully, technological disruptors like AI are coming in to help smooth things along, perhaps. To spin this, my original question. Sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to that around the, you completely agree with everything that, biopharma tends to have a barbell structure, and that AI, as I was talking about, hopefully is bringing repeatability into the process. But really appreciate what you were saying as well about the complexity on the personalized health side. I know that the people that I spend time with, and I myself believe this, that the future is not simply using AI to discover drugs, or using, a portfolio company of ours, Applied VR, got clearance just literally yesterday to start marketing a VR therapeutic, and which is an amazing step unto itself. But I think where we're really going, and this is where the complexity comes in, is that personalized health doesn't always just mean a pill specifically for you. What it can also mean is a portfolio of parallel therapies that you're receiving simultaneously, which may include a pill, which may include a digital therapeutic, which may include an app that provides you community, which may also include something for your mental health, right? Because as it's been well shown, especially among cancer patients, those who have substantial supporting networks, who do not suffer from any type of food or housing or monetary instability, that have stable relationships, those folks do better. And so I think, personalized healthcare is when you receive a cancer diagnosis, potentially, you're getting a pill, a digital therapeutic, you're getting community, and you're getting mental health support in one form or another, all in there. And I think that's the true future, where right now we're really likely making investments where we're investing in a company that's only doing one of those things. But I think the future is maybe indication based, and it's an ecosystem solution to a healthcare problem that includes all of those pieces. And that is not easy to do. We're doing all of those things right now, but we're not doing them in parallel in a single product currently. But if we get there, I think the future of healthcare becomes very exciting and very patient-centric at that point.
Yeah, may I add something to that?
Absolutely.
There's one more thing I wanted to add to your original question, Franco, of why is it hard for people to invest in biotech? And I think Andre gave a very good explanation. The science is uncertain, but there is also this regulatory uncertainty. It's not just that the science is uncertain, but how you design that clinical experiment, that clinical trial, and how many patients, that design itself has a lot of just mathematical uncertainty. And that makes it, very hard to, you may have a drug that actually works, but, the trials may not show that, and so on. So it's just a combination of these different factors. So people who are investing in this either have to have a deep understanding, or they need to have a community who's actually sharing these insights.
To bounce off what Swati said, I think patience is going to be the virtue. Because when we talk about research and development and the whole process, I think what the whole COVID deal has kind of taught all of us is that we can't move down the future where we're going to get, drugs through the pipeline in a year. And I think that's what's happened, is that at least the colleagues that I talk to who are in the investment business and the biotech, is this sense of, well, we'll be able to get the return instantly if we see a designated unicorn. And so, Swati makes a great point in that we have to get back to this thinking where, no, we have to be even more methodical in our approach in terms of getting a product from discovery to the point where, it's going commercial. So it's drawing back these unrealized expectations based on what we learned from COVID and getting back to the roots of the methodical approach of getting a product, through R&D, and then with the aspiration that's going to be successful on the other end.
And adding on to what people have been saying, I think that we're talking about complexity, and I think that when you talk about that, it's complex among scientists. And if you are planning to go public and get investor support, you have to make sure that what is complex is distilled down to its bare essence, and it's transformed into a narrative that is easily digestible to the general public and to the regular investors. There are sophisticated investors who, a lot of those people may have been educated in science, but a lot of people have not been. So you get a deep dive into complexity, and then you lose people. And it's there's so much great things happening, and it's very important to get the support of the general public and other investors. Another point is that many of these companies are not profitable, and maybe they won't be profitable for a bit. They have to have a plan, a roadmap to show that there is profitability. It has to be based in reality. And I think when you get companies, when you are in that situation, what you want to do is to get people to focus on your potential. And one way to do that is to talk about projections, pro formas, and things that could happen in the future. And I think that once that happens, you have the regulators looking at that very, very, very closely. So we're talking about some challenges. I think that that's a challenge, because I think that the regulators are focusing on that right now. What are companies saying to attract investors? And it has to be defensible. So that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah, if I may add something, Franco. Yeah, so you guys talked about how to make investors to be more receptive to the biotech deals, biotech companies, right? There's another important part to keep in mind, which is I've noticed that, I guess because of most of biotech companies are pre-revenue, they're running cash flow negative. When they raise money, they use a lot of creative, instruments, right? You usually throw in, warrants, rights. You have a lot of things. But look at what happened with Tesla. If you open the Wall Street Journal yesterday, right? Tesla and JP Morgan, they are having a fight now because of some of those warrants from Tesla was priced maybe 5 years ago at a different price, and warrants as usual, right? Tesla had a lot of split, issuing new stocks, converts, and all those strike price had to be reset a couple of times, and ultimately it caused a lot of disagreement, right, among different investors. So for biotech firms, when you have super complex shareholder structure, all those warrants and all those, how do you keep, the investor to be, not only treated fairly, but also keep the investors informed, let them know what is going on? It's very difficult. And, it's not like, I think Andre mentioned about coffee makers, right? Coffee makers don't issue so many complex warrants to different investors and reset the price every 2 to 3 years. And that's why quite often I think makes a lot of people afraid of investing in biotech, because they don't even know the valuation. They invest and they don't know what they get. And in fact, even if they know what they get, after 2 years it might be changed. And for the shareholder price reset, it's quite often, it's very complex. And so which comes to the question of, when you're a public traded company, eventually, how to disclose all those, right? And what I've noticed is a lot of biotech companies are relatively small. They don't have a deep bench of, corporate, governance structure with a lot of, experienced independent directors and all those. And maybe they're very good at research. But how do you make sure the company is properly all the major events disclosed to the investors, and the finance, the cap table is run properly? That's a huge challenge, and that's why I think we need there are more work to be done too.
Yes, that's exactly also what the SEC in the US is focusing on, exactly what Kevin has just talked about.
Yeah, well, before we depart from the topic of complexity and some of the issues that presents for investors, for going public, for valuation, for due diligence, etc. I was wondering specifically, SPACs versus IPOs, given SPACs generally higher speediness, they're quicker to do, etc. To what extent does that impact the process of valuation, etc., and specifically technological or therapeutic due diligence? I'm thinking back to some of the comments from Ior Kenduhov, who's not with us but spoke earlier on some longevity companies specifically who went public on the basis of preclinical data and who saw their market cap dynamics go not as they expected when they had clinical trial failures, etc. Both Kevin and Mark remarked on the fact that SPACs can often be quicker to do, etc. Does that perhaps present some element of risk in doing due diligence, etc., and proper, reliable valuation, given the higher complexity of biotech, healthcare, etc., versus other sectors?
I think of it this way. I'm not necessarily a big SPAC fan because I look at it between the difference of fundamentals versus rainbows, in a sense, with regards to SPACs. But I think SPACs, depending on, some people would say the presence of the founder, if the founder is a rock star, or if the founder is somebody that can generate, investment dollars, or a founder who can generate excitement about this SPAC. I've always been along the lines of, I'm more or less fundamentals. I like to learn a little bit more about, the company's leadership, what the vision is, versus, this is a good idea, so we're going to take it to market. So I'm a little bit jaundiced when it comes to the SPAC approach. I understand it does have some validity within the marketplace because, most companies don't want to go through the rigor that you would have to go through as far as going IPO. But, I would say, if you are going to go down the road of SPAC, whatever due diligence that can be a part of that process, to me, in my opinion, is always a good thing.
Yeah, I think that if you could look at if you look at the SPAC, and the SPAC has a timeline. It usually has like a 18-month to 2 years to get a deal done. There's situations where the SPAC enters into a agreement with a prospective merger candidate, and they conduct due diligence. If that process takes place like in the beginning or in the middle of the SPAC's life, there's ample time, and there is some caution where in situations where the SPACs enters into this agreement with a potential candidate, and is getting closer to the end of its life. In that case, there has to be very much attention, extreme focus on getting that due diligence done within that compressed amount of time. Some people have said that as you get closer, that the due diligence, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, that sort of has a lesser priority. So you have to make sure, because you know that people are going to be looking at that. You just have to make sure that within the confines of the time, the importance of doing due diligence for the investors and the regulators, that you have to get that done and do it very effectively.
Okay, yeah, so in other words, there is ample time, but it should be done earlier in the process than later, etc. Thank you, Mark. I'd love to hear everyone's opinions on how COVID shakes things up with regards to healthcare, pharma, and biotech. We've heard a number of speakers remark about the fact that perhaps contrary to initial expectations, COVID actually facilitated a bit of a boom in the space, whether you're looking at VC or SPACs, IPOs, or even the performance of biotech stock indices, etc. And among other things, COVID really elevated to a prominent place in public perception the importance of health. Health is new wealth, right? We're all thinking about our health these days. So, but we've also seen at least a little bit, I think, of a downturn in 2021 compared to 2020 and that phenomenal rise. Do you see this prolonging? Do you think that the impact of COVID specifically and broadly on biotech, healthcare, et cetera, continuing or tapering off? Where are we going?
What I think is there's likely the same type of patterns that we've seen after other dislocations, that I think in general, general populations will go back to the way it was, or people will react to what's in front of them. I think here in the U.S. and around the world, most people, they're reacting to what's in front of them, right? Getting through the day and whatnot. And so as this subsides, thoughts will move on. However, I think that's very different than the awakening in capital markets. And I think that will last much longer here. And I think that there is among decision makers, there's also this better deep-rooted understanding of how healthcare is fundamental to functioning markets, right? At a macro scale, how it's fundamental to even national security, right? And the strength of nations at that level. And so I think that's not going to be forgotten. I think you'll see increases in publicly available funds. I think you'll see increases in privately available funds, even as we see things recede from the front pages of newspapers. But I also think the threshold, the expectations are going to go way up. I think, Andre, you mentioned, the creation of vaccines in just such a short period of time. I think people are going to think that that's the norm, rather than understanding that as a group scientific achievement by numerous scientists at numerous companies. This is something that we'll look back, many, many years from now and say how amazing that it was that we were able to marshal the talent and the resources to do things this quickly. But I think because of that, the mark has gone up. So people are also not going to be say, oh, I've heard that before. Moderna already did that, and they did it this quickly. You guys aren't as fast as that, or you're not as cheap as that, or whatever it might be. So anyway, in short, basically, I think capital will continue to flow in, both from governments for the reasons I mentioned, for private markets, because now they understand the magnitude of what can happen, the multiplying effects of dollars and enterprise value when you do get it right in biopharma and in biotech. But I do expect to see a pullback in the headlines and CEOs won't be the celebrities that they are in 5 years that they are today that work in the space.
Sure. Very well said. Andre, did you want to add something to that?
No, Daniel's spot on. I think the expectation to kind of come back down, so to speak, with regards to, getting products through the process. COVID, it's had its lasting effect, whether you say it's negative or positive. But I think the positive piece on COVID is that it's brought everybody back to the sense of, pharmaceuticals and the life sciences are important to our everyday lives. It's what helps us keep going. The industry are not a bunch of devils at this point in time. So there's a reason why research and development is so important, in that it keeps moving forward with the new technology, with the new AI, so that we can bring, products to market that not only put a Band-Aid on a situation, but actually rectify and cure. So I think COVID has done many things, but if I look at it from a glass half full, it's gotten everybody's attention to say how important, research and development and the industry is with regards to keeping us healthy.
There's one more point I want to add, is in terms of consumer education. So for example, these at-home COVID test kits, right? So people got them home. They actually read the instructions. They figured out how to take the swabs to put them in. And there is a reader right there, and you can even get the information on your phone. So this was an accelerated learning experience for many consumers who now realize, oh, by the way, I can conduct many, many tests at home, and I can get all of the results online on my phone, and I can actually store them for convenience. And now that expectation starts to proliferate into other therapies or diagnostics and such, where you are like, yeah, I want constant continuous glucose monitoring. I want by the way, I also want my blood pressure monitoring, which is not there yet, and so on, right? So people have become more attuned to this idea of better understanding the possibilities in healthcare.
I was going to say, such a great point, because if you look at a specific industry in our market that's kind of gone through the roof based on what's happened in this pandemic, and that's telemedicine.
Right.
So again, to Swati's point, you had to stay at home, so you couldn't go see your physician, physically. So the whole telemedicine, piece of our business and that technology has kind of skyrocketed because it's had to. So that's such a great point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Kate, did you have anything particular to add? I remember you had a great op-ed in Market Watch the other year, I think last year, with Dmitry Kaminsky, our general partner, on how COVID's impacting both biotech investments and longevity in particular. General agreement with the panel, or anything else to add?
I'm in general agreement, but also I will add that, a deep knowledge group has been talking about longevity, which we define as health span, or living healthier for longer. And we've been on it since 2013. So for us, it was a very welcome development to see that, of course, we have other, players in the longevity community, but specifically 2020 brought everyone's focus to, health truly being a new wealth. And we were, glad to publish our piece in Market Watch on that subject. I also would say that, yes, 2020 was definitely a remarkable year for biotech. We're seeing a slightly different trend, in 2021. My understanding is that, we will continue having a focus on health, but perhaps not like in terms of investments in 2020, but definitely the focus has shifted, and this is very good indeed.
Okay, well said. So I'd like to shift gears. We've talked a lot about how investment in financial infrastructure and different types of vehicles, et cetera, impact the industry, et cetera, and the intersection there. I'd love to hear our panel's thoughts on any specific sectors of interest. In particular, are there any sectors that you see as being undervalued at the moment, which you expect to see have a huge rise moving forward? Telemedicine was a great example. I wouldn't say it's underrepresented per se, but it saw a huge boost from these external factors that were driven by COVID. So underrepresented sectors in biotech, healthcare, digital health, pharma, or longevity. What's not really on the spotlight right now that might be taking prominence in the coming years? Open question for all.
Let me take this one. And basically, I know that I will not be most probably agreed upon on this by investors, because they primarily look at the business side of things. Of course, they should do. But in my opinion, antibiotics area is really kind of in pain right now. At least has been for the last couple of, I think for the last decade or maybe two. And we have seen some signs of, of increasing success rates. Some companies emerged, new antibiotics. But the point is, the COVID might be a very, it might not be the greatest risk that we are facing in the coming decade, because if antibiotics, and they are running out very quickly right now, if they go basically useless, but because bacteria they kind of mutate, and we have seen a lot of new cases where we basically have antibiotic resistant bacteria in hospitals everywhere, and usual bacteria can kill a human if an antibiotic treatment is not administered. And imagine if there are no antibiotics left, let's say by 2030, then there's going to be a lot of chaos. And so, in my opinion, some platform-based companies like, for example, iCheap, I remember that was the company who developed the tool to quickly develop antibiotic from soil on the high throughput kind of approach, iCheap or something like that. They developed teixobactin. So the point is, I believe that now the public is not aware of this problem to the very to the extent they should. Only specialists, probably some, WHO, I mean, some experts, they of course know the problem, but the general public is not aware of this problem for the most part. And I believe those kind of companies who spot this and who can really bring startups to the market, or maybe invest in some early stage, will be very timely in like 5 years from now, when this antibiotics thing actually goes to some critical level. In my opinion, we might have another Moderna, but in antibiotic space, let's say in 5 or 7 years from now, if the catalyst is if we catalyze the processes of investing in that area today. But of course, everybody knows why antibiotics is unattractive for investors from the investment standpoint. So I'm not a big expert in the antibiotic space. It's just something that I wanted to stress, that this area really needs a lot of activity, much more activity than it has right now.
I myself, I've never heard of that, and if that does come about, that would be a disaster for humanity. And also, there's great opportunity for, as you mentioned, some companies stepping in. Are you aware of companies that are able to, or very close to stepping in and creating that platform that you talked about?
That's you mean the iCheap that I mentioned, or?
Yeah. I think that you were saying that.
Yeah, that's just one. That was the research back in 2015, I guess. That I don't remember the name of the company, but teixobactin is kind of the lead molecule that they developed, and they claimed at that point that the molecule would not develop resistance due to its its properties. But again, what they developed, the iCheap, was that device which would allow quick discovery of new antibiotics as they are needed, pretty much the way that, like, very simplistic comparison. I mean, it's very simplistic, but it's like mRNA technology where you can basically print vaccines very quickly, essentially. This is kind of like that approach where you can basically have soil, and most of the antibiotics were discovered from soil, as we all know, and then discover the new antibiotics much faster and reiterate and pivot with some new bacteria types, etc. So just one company, I mean, there are many of antibiotics companies, but in general, this is very underrepresented area in terms of funding, because for the most part, big pharma abandoned this area because it's just not comparable to cancer therapeutics, because you can make much more, like, it's not about money, of course, but you can be much more safe in terms of business operations when you developed, cancer therapeutics compared to antibiotics. But anyway, that's just open question. That's something I'd like to raise here.
And I will add my 2 cents here as well, with a disclaimer that this is a area that is of specific interest to us. And if anything, we have a newly formed subsidiary, Femtech Analytics. So I would like to see, more investment in femtech, defined as, products, services, software, diagnostics, which use technology to focus and improve women's health. There are positive developments, in that field. However, we think that this area actually is underrepresented in a general picture, and would like to see positive trajectory in that regard as well.
Yeah, if I had to say anything, what's going to be of interest to investors, certainly to us, is wearables. And there's wearables of all kinds. There's this rise in the idea of quantified self and tracking everything about me. And people are interested. And these are like things that sell in the millions of units, and then there is the data data subscription. So it's a very profitable businesses coming out of this. That is one area which I think we are quite interested in. The other thing I would say is, I personally feel everyone should have a little bit in their portfolio, or at least I do in my portfolio, of just biotech and therapeutics. Therapeutics, why? Because I think the likelihood of success may be low, or the chances of big outcome are low, but the outcome itself can be very big. So the weighted risk is, or the weighted outcome is, expected outcome is very high. So I like to personally, in my personal portfolio, have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 therapeutics, and then lots of these other different areas that are coming up. Wearables is important.
And in this case, would you lean towards things like indices, biotech stock indices that focus?
No, I wouldn't lean towards biotech stock indices. Sorry, I would go earlier and pick out the specific stocks, but that's just me. Not everyone.
It matches your background and area of expertise. So,
yeah. If I may add anything, I guess all the sectors you guys covered can go through spec IPO, all of them. I think wearables, very popular. Digital health, totally. I think last year there were several very major deals in digital health, remote monitoring and diagnosis. And of course, biotech, right? We are seeing probably several deals per month for biotech companies go through a spec. So across board, all different sectors in healthcare, I think many of them are going through the spec IPO process. Oh, lastly, I forgot to mention also, I would say the healthcare insurance sector. I think currently, a lot of people are very upset with what they can get with, in the US for the healthcare insurance. I think it's very arcane. The model, everything is just, it's probably what's fit for 30, 20 years ago. Really not a good, a business model for the current world post COVID. So a lot of those innovations are being done, and I think many of them are going to end up in a spec. Like Clover Health, right? The one in California, very successful company, and I think more is coming down through spec.
Yeah, the health insurance is an interesting point. I mean, I'm aware of a lot of developments in terms of gamified health insurance and providers, offering discounted rates or other forms of remuneration for meeting certain health goals, et cetera.